a couple days ago, like President Trump was having an event at the White House where he revealed the official flag for the U.S. Space Force, and I was wondering, like, do you know why the U.S. is like now like officially like establishing a U.S. Space Force, even though like officially we don't even have people in space? I mean, like, are they like trying to prepare us to like slowly disclose the existence of like our advanced space force?
Well, depends who are considering they. Your current president might have some information. Obviously, he's not having the need to know from what we're aware, right? What some secret societies have had contact with us and others, right? They're much more aware of our presence up there and others up there. And have also established certain colonies, right? It's unlikely the president of your current country is fully aware of any of those Mars or Moon, etc. colonies by your own people from Earth, right? At least not to the same degree that some others that you might term Illuminati or whatever the fuck are aware of, let alone contracts or directions with beings out there. However, he mostly is more aware than the average person in your society, obviously, so he's privy to some information. It's likely that the person at least is willing to disclose something, and others in your government might be okay with it. They might have their own agendas, Project Blue Book, etc., correct? There might even be some nefarious activities that they're okay with disclosing as long as it doesn't interfere in their own business, etc. Conspiracies upon conspiracies. We are not dabbling in those details simply because we don't care. We only care if people come up here and cause some trouble, right? Now, remember, everything is a reflection. So if you want disclosure, which again is likely to happen this decade, but only in conjunction with warlike scenarios, etc. Currently, again, could happen without war, could happen without disclosure, but currently those two things are likely to happen. But again, just currently, from what you're currently asking through your whole current situation on Earth, again, Corona, whatever the fuck, has taken over a lot from the strategy. Again, we're not going to go into details how this whole happened, etc. Well, trolling on details, the general idea is simply energy is being put out, including the energy of disclosure, right? But currently it's tied in the energy of trauma and destruction, war, etc. So more likely disclosure to war. However, it always depends what you're pulsing out. If you're disclosing more, you will live in a society that has more disclosure, correct? One motto. Water.
Okay. Okay.
Better.
Okay. So can you say what the United Nations Space Force is all about, like when it was created and why?
Well, there's obviously the interference, as we mentioned before, with the Wessel's region, and of course the nation of Russia that to some degree now altered it on the surface, and of course your own country, and the whole idea of a race for space, and obviously also the formation of a Western-Eastern alliance, right? Also military largely in nature, also economic. You might consider it economic contracts or military contracts, like you have your NATO for the Western lines, your Warsaw Pact for the Eastern, etc., correct? And then you have the international idea of both Western and Eastern, which combines certain forces of both of those two power blocks that still are existent to some degree, which also had the idea of establishing certain military forces like your blue helmet over there, and including simply the idea of something like a space force. So also to a large degree, military advancement, also colonization programs, not much different as you had on your own planet before you had fully explored it. Well, at least a surface of what you think you explored.
Okay, so like, is there one person who's in charge of the United Nations Space Force now?
Not that we're aware of. There might be. What we're aware of is not necessarily one single person. Likely it's in control of your more North American secret governments, what are called such, likely in your own region. So again, it's obviously physically located there, right? Not
Okay.
the Space Force traveling in space, obviously, but the agency. But we can't perceive one single individual. It's not your president, if that's what you're asking.
Do you know if the Secretary General of the UN is told about the Space Force?
Perhaps to some degree, but again, like the individual is also not privy to some of the details. Again, there's very often the cover story and the cover story, so your government officials get more than the public, but still not quite as much as secret societies. And even among them, you have ranks, hierarchy, which you learn from us, by the way. upon which you need to rise higher and higher to get privy to more and more information. There's usually a cover story or dumbed down version of further down you low. And again, your presidents and generals, etc., and officials are usually not at the top.
Okay. So can you say roughly how big their space force is? The UN one?
Well, they're more or less merged with your own one and the Russian one, so there's difficult to differentiate. Again, we're not shaking hands with them on a regular basis, so we don't count them or anything. We aren't counting humans to fall asleep or something, which we likely would, since those mundane affairs aren't necessarily much of our importance. But it's likely they have about 1 million troops, at least, but it doesn't mean they're all up in here in space. That doesn't mean they're all on colonization projects, but at least they have enough to establish cities, right? And fill an entire city with personnel.
Wow, 1 million people seems like a lot. I mean, where do they get these people from? Are they like recruited from Earth, or are they just born into the program?
Well, first recruited from Earth, and then further on, after colonization program has been established, typically people are being born up there. Same as people from the Vessels program did up there, then American, then Russian, and then the combined force of American and Russian troops. And of course, there are many other beings from your own planet that have been also abducted and put into certain programs by different people, etc. That are went missing, and their whole idea, of course, then people up there are breeding themselves, and then from there on develop further and further. But we're talking about 1 million program that's the combined effort of what we assume you're subsidizing under the United Nations of programs. They might all be from your country, for example, or from Russia or other areas, but a combined effort, again, the United Nations, right?
Okay. I know, like you had said, the Freemasonic Space Force got started before the UN Space Force. Like, does the Illuminati also have its own space force?
Well, the United Nations is more or less submerged under the original Freemasonic one.
Okay.
Since the earlier one is in charge of your country, and your country is more or less supplying the military equipment and economic backup for the United Nations.
Okay.
Remember, on your planet, usually just follow the money, as far as you can.
Right. How many space forces from Earth are there in total?
Depends on how far you want to differentiate the United Nations space for different factions. Maybe there's the one from the Vessels region, and then there's the United Nations force, but again, United Nations force mostly comprise of American and Russian troops, but there are also many others that are adjacent to it. Of course, you could divide the Freemasonic ones or different nations that have contributed to it, but they're all more or less working together. And of course, there might be some remnants left, right, of certain groups that collaborate with other extraterrestrial races, but we would subsidize them under those two umbrella groups of both of the Vessels region that broke off from your own planet, and later on that one that broke off from your own planet that perhaps more Illuminati termed or United Nations, depends again, those are all words from your own language, from your own culture, from your own planet. They're all more or less for us all a bunch of hairless monkeys. The only reason we're differentiating between the Vessels group or rather from the Vessels regions group because of its own interest and its questions towards us in numerous of what you consider time frames and questioning from people from your area of certain space groups. But of course, if a person from Russia would be asked, would likely have to also detail further what their particular adjustment was. But again, of course, obviously, there was a difference in when people arrived there from the Vessels region, from your region, from the Russian region, and then everybody else basically, but more or less under the higher umbrella of the United Nations grouping, which made some peace agreements also with groupings that arrived earlier from the Russian region, who also had agreements with other species, who had also agreements with other species. It greatly depends on where you draw the lines of what one group would be and what would the other group would be. Our million assessment refers to the entirety of different groupings that we now submerge under the label of United Nations that you asked about.
Okay, so the ones under the umbrella of the United Nations, can you say like how far from Earth they've reached with their own ships?
Well, they're still inside your solar system, that's what you're referring to. They have colonies on Mars and the Moon.
Okay.
We're not certain if they've ventured any further. There's been exploration certain moons or Jupiter. We're not certain if they've established anything there. Also the asteroid belt, etc. But we're not certain, we're aware there's many information from your own planet that there's been bases all around the solar system to the Kuiper Belt and the idea of even colonizing other parts. We cannot confirm this. The only thing we can confirm is there are bases on Mars, Moon, because we're aware of those, and there have been attempts to travel further in your solar system, but not necessarily leaving it.
Okay. Can you say how big their biggest spaceships are? Like, for example, do they have any ships that are as big as aircraft carriers?
Yes.
Even bigger?
First, a football field.
Wow. Where do they build these ships? I mean, do they build them off of Earth?
Correct. Many of the parts were brought to the moon, built there, and then from there traveled to Mars. And on Mars, of course, there's also the possibility to build much larger crafts without anybody suspecting anything. Many parts were also built, obviously, in Antarctica, if you're referring to the vessels grouping. Again, we're referring obviously to the grouping from the vessels reaching out that the person is individually involved with to some degree, right? Except perhaps their lifestyle, etc., that you're gonna getting in there. Your own idea, however, being ships from your own planet traveling up there, yes, many have gone up there that weren't officially acknowledged. Some were officially acknowledged, but they brought something with that was not officially acknowledged. Again, a lot of secrecy, but most of them were built outside your own planet, even in space itself, right? Ships traveling from Earth, from the moon, up in space, meeting in space, joining, right? Like some of your rockets that have broken off, right? Officially, at least. They're opposite way around. Some are being assembled in space. So you have smaller ships being assembled and being put into larger ships, etc., etc.
Okay. So I'm sure the ships have artificial gravity, right?
They have something like official gravity that you have in the floor, right? That you can walk inside the ships, so you don't float around. But there's usually smaller areas. It's not like there's a huge luxurial field. Also, you're largely misinformed about the gravity on other planets, so therefore you can much easier transverse on other planets once you land there, right? And even breathe much easier than you have been taught. So it's not that people have to dwell on ships 24/7, as you're saying, even though there's so 24/7 out there anyway.
Okay. Do you know, like, roughly how fast their fastest ships can travel compared to light speed? Like 1% of light speed or what?
Perhaps 1 or 2, perhaps. Much faster
Okay.
than you're officially acknowledged, but not nearly as fast, for example, as higher advanced civilizations can.
Right. Have any of the space forces been in any space battles?
Among each other, yes. With extraterrestrial races, rarely. Once they arrived on Mars, there was some upheaval, correct? If you want to consider it a battle. But it's not like your Star Wars scenario with huge ships fighting each other for a longer period of time, lots being blown up, but skirmishes have happened, yes, of course.
Okay. And you said that the astronauts of these space forces remain in the third dimension, but like, does that include the ones who were given a ride to Treezal by other civilizations?
If other civilizations aid them, it's like they teleport them there, so therefore they can transverse your third dimensionality and come to a higher one. But again, it's a matter of meeting, right? They have to lower their own consciousness and meet them halfway. In between, so to speak, the best way you can put it. And when you travel there, you don't travel with light speed or a percentage of light speed. You simply enter what you perhaps would consider in your own mythology, so to speak, a wormhole, right? Or if it's
Right.
officially created one, and then you emerge somewhere else. You simply, we mentioned this previously in our lecture, the idea you don't move from one place to another one, you simply change the pattern of your current location to another pattern. It becomes more like a shirt that you change, and then you have the new shirt on, you're immediately in another place, right? You don't go from A to B to you redefine your state from A to B. More like a program, perhaps, correct? You
Right.
teleport, basically.
So, like, I'm still a little bit confused about Treezal. Like, in the third dimension, is Treezal a black hole or is it a sun with planets orbiting around it?
From your aware of, in your current dimensionality, there is a black hole. But in the black hole, there's something like a planetary body. And again, it depends currently what dimensionality you're asking from, what you're coming from what we're of the third. There is a black hole, but it leads to something that would be considered a planet.
Okay. Do you know if the U.S. Space Force really has had like a cultural exchange program with certain beings in Zeta Reticuli who are allowed to live on Earth while astronauts from Earth live in Zeta Reticuli?
We're aware of those theories and those concepts. We can't confirm or deny this. We're aware those things have happened. We're aware those certain contacts have happened. However, people have been exchanged. If there has been technology exchange for experiments, I'm not exactly sure about the detail, but in general, there has been such contacts, yes.
Okay. Uh, all right. Well, yeah, that answers my questions about that. And so, like, I guess
Doesn't
to move.
necessarily mean that people from your planet have turned somewhere else, though, right? So exchange probably is perhaps not the right term, but beings from there have been on Earth for exchange for certain abilities, yes.
Okay, yeah, like I think it was called Project Serpico or something, where like supposedly U.S. astronauts lived or still live in Zeta Reticuli. So like I guess that's just bullshit.
Possibly, again, we are not privy to all the exact details, but from what we are aware of, it's mostly them having come to your own Earth, so the whole mythology around your Area 51 comes from, right?
Okay. Like you said before that the US's and Russia's and Germany's space forces might be considered to have started about a century ago when they started sending plants into space, but I mean, can you say what type of technology sent these plants into space? Like was it I don't know, like anti-gravity ships or just traditional rockets or what?
From the vessels reach what we are aware of, there were something like alternative technology, what you're considering such, like flying saucers, you would tell them now, right?
Okay.
Those were later copied by what you consider the Russian-American powers, especially after your Second World War, what they got their hands on, so to speak, including rockets. But yes, a lot of space exploration happened with what you would consider flying saucer technology and not with your propulsional rockets.
So do you know when the US first sent plants into space? Was it after World War II?
From what we're aware of, yes, but likely earlier than what they officially admit.
Okay.
It's possible they also went already during the war.
Okay. Um so do you know like the specific year whenever Germany first sent these plants into space?
Also, like the during first beginning of the war, again, they had already had those particular ships, also had those considered telepathic communication of the watch they were built during the 20s. So not quite 100 years when you're counting right now, but approximately. Remember, time frame is also malleable, right? Always keep that in mind. The idea being already in the 20s they were setting up such crafts, and then in the 30s and the 40s there were attempts to colonize other planets.
Okay.
Also, then during the ending year of the war, was likely also venturing beyond the solar system, but that's not something we had much to do with.
Okay. Do you know who the US president was whenever the US first sent actual astronauts into space?
Possibly a Truman person, but we are not entirely certain.
Okay.
It was also with the help of a certain species you're terming synthetic race, right?
Right. Um do you know if Russia sent their cosmonauts into space before or after the US did?
Possibly after, but there was not much of a difference.
Okay. Um, do you know how
There was
advanced?
also much more joint cooperation between both.
Okay. Like, do you have any details about China's space force today? Like how advanced it is?
Much more than possibly admitted, also similar to your US, at least publicly, what US publicly acknowledges.
Okay. Do you have any details about when their space force got started?
Much later, also with the help of the Russian.
Okay. Would you still consider China's space force to be under like would you refer to about like the UN Space Force being an umbrella of like a bunch of different space forces.
Yes, however, there's also conflict emerging, obviously, not just on your ground, but also up in space. You're actually more at the brink of a war than you were during your so-called Cold War, right?
Right.
Because during your Cold War, much of your tit for tat was more of a show. Now it's more real. Ironic, though.
Okay. Okay. And like you said that U.S. presidents aren't necessarily told the full details of the U.S. and other space forces. But like, what about autocrats like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping? Like, are they fully aware of their country's space forces?
Jinping, yes, to some degree. But in person, we are entirely certain is also not as powerful as you might imagine. There are also mostly elites that governing that country through their own means. Obviously, there's also the Chinese influence, as China is getting more and more control also in the Russian region. Again, it might also lead up to what you referred earlier, a possibility of a civil war in the country of Russia that might trigger more. So it's also likely any detailed information also being handed over from one secret service to the other, more than to one president or the other.
Okay. Now, like you said before, that the largest of the UN Space Force ships are as big as an aircraft carrier, and then you said like they're perhaps as big as a football field. And like I don't know if you mean an American football field or a European football field, but like either way, like aircraft carriers are like roughly about 3 times as large as a football field. So like, I mean, can you clarify like how big the biggest ships are? Like, are they closer in size to an aircraft carrier or a football field?
Perhaps closer to an aircraft carrier.
Okay.
The biggest of the biggest, yes. But again,
Okay.
we are not keeping tabs exactly what you're sending out in space unless it comes close to us.
Right, right. So, like, what do these largest ones look like? I mean, are they similar at all to the USS Enterprise in Star Trek, where, you have kind of mainly like a saucer type shape with some other little protrusions like connecting to it? Or are they like Star Destroyer ships in Star Wars where they're kind of like more triangular or what?
They're more, well, shaped like a rocket, perhaps to some degree. Like they have like one pointy end and one larger end in the back. And then there are more smaller ships attached to the sides of it. Can be round bolts. So if they were all the ships that are attached to it would leave, right? It would look entirely different. It looks more like a. We're looking for a reference to vessels. By the idea of you have what you make your wine of, right?
Oh, grapes. Yeah.
Grapes, yes.
Yeah.
Like a grape tree. And then those ships are like grapes. Grape form. If they would leave, right? Then you would be left with something that looks like a grape tree without the grapes.
Oh, okay. That's funny. It looks like must be a weird looking ship, but okay. Um,
Without the grapes, so to speak. Yes, when they're attached to it, it looks somewhat more harmonious.
um, so, like, can you say, like, in general, what the different Space Force bases on the moon look like? I mean, are they kind of like, is it just one big dome on the surface, or like a series of domes, or are they underground, or what?
Many of them are on the ground, many of them are also abandoned, just ruins now, right?
Hmm. Okay.
Mostly on the
Uh,
dark side, you would still ever find the ruins that are clearly man-made.
okay. So are they kind of like dome shaped or what?
Some of them are, others are more edgy, right?
Okay.
You're also familiar with when it's indeed built like a swastika shape, or that's also largely been ruined over a larger period of what you call time, or some of them are perhaps more pyramidal structure, but they're much older. Remember, beings have been on your moon much before anybody from your own planet in recent times ventured off there. So much have also been just hollowed out or reused.
Okay. So yeah, like the movie Iron Sky has a military base in the shape of a swastika. Like, are you saying that there was a military base that looked like that in the movie?
Not quite.
But what I mean, what did it look like? Was it in the shape of a swastika?
Yes, indeed, in terms of swastikas, there's likely still some to be found there, but not like in that movie. And they're like it's like gigantic, tall, and there, of course, there's a lot of mixture of what we're aware of from the vessel. That there's a lot of mixture of primitive 40s technology with spacefaring civilization, which obviously doesn't add up in reality, but also where there's no documentary but a humorous attempt to poke fun at their idea of something like this existing whatsoever. And indeed, yes, there are structures built that indeed would look or resemble a swastika like the two large Draconian destroyed her. So we're certain if they still look exactly the same manner.
So how did they get destroyed? Was there some like space battle between the Germans and somebody else?
Yes, but also some are blown up and abandoned. Scorched Earth policy, or scorched moon, rather, in this case.
Right. So, like, who built them? I mean, was it the Germanies that ventured off into space after World War II, or was it more ancient civilizations?
Both. During World War II, they ventured off, or, as mentioned previously, many of those things were simply hauled out and reused
Okay.
and built upon.
Okay. So, what did the bases on Mars look like?
They're more domed. They're under larger domes. The Euro peoples have also arrived there more from what you're aware. They're planning to venture there again. We are certain if they're going to succeed. Or there are those that were been earlier thereon. Remember, Mars is also more inhabitable than what you're publicly acknowledged or aware of. However, it's still not like a planet like your Earth currently, but it's possible to live there much easier than you might be imagining. So there are larger dwellings.
Okay. Do you know if like the colonists that live on Mars, like whenever they're outside, do they have to wear spacesuits, or is Mars like has it been terraformed to the point where they don't have to wear spacesuits?
It's highly advisable for your species. It's possible. It's not like you would immediately die, but would like to be very uncomfortable.
Okay. Um Now like there's a book and a movie called Starship Troopers about a war on a desert-like planet between soldiers and like some kind of space force from Earth, and like between them and the native insectoids of this planet, which like whenever you were telling me about the conflict between like the US and the native Martian insectoids, like it kind of reminded me of this movie. Um but anyway, like, can you describe what some of these battles between the U.S. and these native insectoids look like? What the battles were like? I mean, and did they involve literal machine guns like in the movie Starship Troopers?
It is unlikely that you would be firing at them with machine guns. It's likely that some other equipment. Again, we're observing your entire cosmos with cameras. What we're reading from Akashic records and from, in this case, the record of our worlds, that then indeed they arrived there after German force had been there, after our humanoid force had been there in longer line, and then we're exploring certain regions which were occupied by the insectoids or other entities, also reptilian nature. There was war and conflict, and there was firing what you consider perhaps more higher advanced weaponry than pure machine gun fire. It's also perhaps some of them spilled over. I can remember whatever the fuck in some of your science fiction movie idea and then mixed with more primitive Earth technology.
Okay, and like you mentioned that whenever World War III begins, it's likely France will get occupied by Russia and China, and disclosure will come about when the resistance has no choice but to fight back using some of their secret weapons. Like, first of all, by secret weapons, like, did you mean their space force?
Possible. Or simply weaponry that is being used in your space. So if there is resistance, it's likely going to happen in the mountain region, for example, the Pyrenees, right? Pyrenees
So,
Mountain.
like, what's so special about that area? Like, is there an entrance to the inner Earth where this weapon is going to come out of?
First to earlier depends if you're going to well, what we can share that there is indeed cavern system where there is technology hidden right now.
Okay.
But
And you
someone
said
would
like,
have to find it.
okay. You said this French resistance would be neither a Western or an Eastern power, but a central power. Like, are you talking about the Illuminati or what?
Unlikely. They're more likely going to be affiliated with the group I had referred earlier, with German resistance fighters are affiliated with what you from their space program. Or it depends greatly if they're being joined by us or not. It's likely not that the French people themselves will likely fight on the Russian side, the way you're currently affiliated. But remember, future is malleable, and especially when it comes to details.
Okay.
So it's like to be in some of the German resistance, but again, not necessarily where the vessel is seated right now, but likely people that are affiliated with what UN considered the space program, etc. And obviously also depends if the American troops would then join them or not, and how this whole program would then progress, also what state the US would be at the time, etc., etc.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess like a final question on this topic. Like, can you say in general, like, what role you expect the various space forces to have in World War III? Like, are there going to be big space battles?
Unlikely, most likely going to take place
It's most
on
likely going to.
Earth
Okay.
and in the skies, where it's likely going to be an air battle,
Okay.
not a space battle.
Okay. I got you.